Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Making Mitigation Work webinar series. My name is Lori Peak, and I serve as the director of the Natural Hazard Center here at the University of Colorado Boulder in snowy Boulder, Colorado. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our monthly webinar series, which is hosted by the Natural Hazard Center and made possible with the support of the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the National Science Foundation. This webinar series highlights recent progress in mitigation policy, practice, and research. We are so grateful that you have made time to join with us today. As wildfires, hurricanes, storms, and flooding affect people across the nation, we are reminded every day of the crucial importance of mitigation planning and risk reduction action. As always, we acknowledge those who are on the front lines of catastrophe, from the healthcare workers fighting COVID-19 to the emergency personnel responding to climate-related catastrophes. We are so grateful for those who are working to understand, respond to, and reduce the complex risks that so many people face. Today, you will hear from an inspiring set of speakers who are using ArcGIS capabilities and other emerging technologies to advance hazard mitigation planning. A few announcements before we begin the formal webinar presentation. This forum is being recorded. The captioned webinar video and the presentation slides will be posted online at the Natural Hazard Center website at hazus.colorado.edu. This is also where you can find the recordings and supplemental materials from the 10 prior Making Mitigation Work webinars, as well as access to many other free resources. Thanks to a partnership with the International Association of Emergency Managers, we can offer 1 contact hour of emergency management training through the IAEM certification program. To receive the credit, you are required to attend the entire webinar session today. Please visit the Making Mitigation Work webinar webpage under the Training tab at hazus.colorado.edu for more information. You can contact Katie Murphy at hazctr@colorado.edu for more information on receiving your certificate for attending this webinar today. If at any point during the presentation you have questions or comments, you can offer those either via the chat function or the Q&A box in Zoom. We will be monitoring both throughout the webinar today. Our speakers will respond to questions as time permits during the webinar. For those questions we are unable to get to, we will share written responses via the Making Mitigation Work webinar page. To get us started today, we actually have 2 questions to kick us off. So if you have downloaded the Zoom app and you are joining us via the Zoom app, we're going to share the first of 2 questions with you now. Katie, would you go ahead and share the first question? Okay, so for those of you who see the screen, can you please respond to into which category does your work fall? Wonderful. So with about an 80% response rate, we have a great mix today. About 26% of you are with state government, about 24% with an academic institution, 21% with local government, 17% are with federal, national, tribal, or territorial government, and about 8% with the private sector. And we have 2 persons from the media out there today. Okay. Thank you so much for that. And then Katie, will you go ahead and share the second question now? So the next question is, how familiar are you with GIS? GI what? Newbie, intermediate, or expert? Okay, so about half of you out there today said you're in the intermediate category. About a third said you are newbies to GIS. Almost 1 out of 5 said you're experts. So we're going to expect some tough questions for our panelists today. And then one of you said, GI what? Thank you so much. Okay, so now everyone, the moment we've been waiting for. I would like to introduce you to our 3 esteemed speakers for today's webinar. Please note that you can find the speakers' full bios on the Natural Hazard Center website. For now, let me offer a brief introduction. Marianne Cardwell is a GIS project coordinator at the Polis Center at Purdue University Indianapolis, which is also fondly known as Pui. She has over 20 years of experience in the GIS field, and her work focuses on environmental and disaster geoinformatics. Shelby Hines is a solution engineer in the Esri, Colorado region office with the state and local government practice. She supports cities and counties in leveraging ArcGIS across departments. Before joining Esri, Shelby worked as a consultant and a mitigation planner with FEMA Region 8 right here in Colorado. Ryan Landcloss is the Director of Public Safety Solutions at Esri, where he is responsible for strategic initiatives across public safety and national security. He also serves as Esri's subject matter expert on GIS for emergency management and humanitarian response. And he leads Esri's Disaster Response Program, or DRP, that provides 24/7 GIS support to organizations during disasters. And I know that some of you on the webinar today have benefited from Esri's 24/7 response capabilities. It is an honor to welcome our speakers today. Without further ado, I'm going to now stop sharing my slides and I'm going to turn this over to Ryan. Ryan, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lori. Thanks for the great introduction this morning. And hi, everybody. It's great to join you here from my home in the Houston, Texas area. I know that many of us are figuring out a new way to work from home, so I'm excited that we get a chance to join and spend a bit of the time together and really think about how GIS supports mitigation planning. And before we deep dive into some of the technology, some great demonstrations of what that technology looks like, I wanted to provide some context because I think we have a very unique opportunity right now, given that we, number one, are all facing the same hazard, right? The same challenges related to COVID-19 globally. That's a unique challenge that we've all had to step into. But I think it also gives us unique opportunity, ways that we can start to look at how COVID-19, if we just think about that for a minute in the framing of today's conversation, has potentially opened doors for all of us within our agencies, within our organizations, that we may have been knocking on for days, months, years potentially for some of us. So why do I say that? Well, number one is that if you look at the wealth of work that you're doing, many of you have answered that you're intermediate and expert and have some experience with GIS, which means that you've seen a lot of the great news that's been out there, your organization, how it's exploiting and using data to drive decision-making, how maps are driving conversations around positioning protective equipment and capabilities into communities. It really is a unique time that the fact that all the work that's gone into the response for COVID-19 and continues to go into the return to workplace and reopening has really shown a light on the value of data, on the value of location-based data specifically, and how GIS can really start to drive those conversations forward. And so what we'd like to share today is a bit of how we think some of the things that you may be experiencing right now, some of the successes I would say that many of us are experiencing right now in our organizations, maybe for the first time, could be applied towards the idea of being better prepared for the next disaster or crisis. Specifically, how we can look at 3 principles that we want to talk about today. The first of those is really about how we start to provide better understanding. So truly transforming complex decisions. If you think about COVID, many of us that are not epidemiologists and understanding the disease propagation and spread, how have we been able to use these tools of GIS and location to drive the conversation around understandable and bite-sized chunks of information? Now, I think the best example of this for all of us just to set the framework here is to tip the hat to our colleagues at Johns Hopkins University, who arguably have the dashboard seen around the world. It is the place that people see on the news. It's still tremendously used out there to make decisions globally about what's happening right now with this pandemic. And why is that? Well, number one, it distilled a lot of complex information from global organizations down into understandable, digestible, bite-sized chunks that allow decision makers to rally around a screen to understand what the spread and progression and the trend lines are actually doing in real time. A tremendous example of that. And there are more than just Johns Hopkins where we've seen this idea of communicating and taking understandable action into the decision maker's standpoint, from the operations center standing around the board and looking at how we can drive better awareness. And these are just a few examples from state levels here domestically in the US. They really are providing a common language for status and for understanding of the risk that continues there, and ultimately those vulnerabilities that persist across the community. So the first opportunity we want to take advantage of is capitalizing on that understanding, maybe for the first time, that GIS, location, and maps can drive a better understanding. And people may, for the first time, actually start to understand what GIS is more than a map, but are interacting with an application and the understanding that that provides. Now, the second thing that I think we have an opportunity to take advantage of here is actually driving it on the where, the understanding of where risk exists across the community. So basing our decisions on data and science, and certainly for GISers, this is nothing new. But if you think about the pandemic for a minute, using these modeling tools that we're used to and have seen now put into play, where epidemiologists are circling around and asking, what does the trend line and the curve look like? When are we going to exceed capacities of a hospital? When are our PPE going to be exceeded at certain levels? And what do different scenarios look like for us related to that progression? GIS has played a tremendous role in this for allowing people to ask and exploit data about that trend and progression, but also then to carry the conversation forward, which is, if we know where those exceedances are going to occur, how do we then better prepare to distribute information and PPE and equipment out across the community landscape to address those deficiencies? Well, again, turning back to GIS and looking at things like location allocation, where we can start to look at needs of the community, where we have those discrepancies and PPE and the usage and the burn rates, how can we actually deliver that more effectively? And I think this is great back to mitigation. So how do we apply resources and funding and money against those same areas in the community that need it the most? So if you think even one step further than that, it's more than just looking at the modeling and the data that we have that shows where the risk is greatest and where the vulnerability exists, but truly starting to drive deeper into the understanding of our community. So looking at the characteristics of that community, understanding more than just demographics and the profiles, but certainly looking at racial injustice, the social economics that are at play. How do we provide equitable access to health equipment in the case of COVID-19, but in the case of mitigation, how do we apply resources equitably across our landscape to have the greatest impact and drive the conversation forward? These infographics that are on the screen are just one way that we've seen change the planning assumptions for COVID-19, and I think have a way to carry us forward into the idea of how we modernize the approach to mitigation. So the last thing we want to kind of pull out today, looking at COVID-19 as a baseline, is the collaboration that's come to bear. The fact that we are combining expertise across jurisdictions, across sectors, to truly deliver the capabilities that we need to respond to such a massive incident that we have in front of us. And if you look at the examples again on the screen from different states and organizations who are providing hub sites, a place or a destination for communities to rally together, to bring that collective expertise to bear and to truly engage the citizens and the community and the activists that are out there, providing that frontline expertise, if you will, back into the decision cycle is key for mitigation as well. And if you look at that whole landscape and what it's taken for us to be more successful than we could have been in COVID-19, it is actually connecting the dots of all of us together. So that is bringing the private sector together, the academic institutions with the modeling and the scientists that are there, the epidemiologists that are to bear, the federal agencies, the state and local, and the nonprofit sector together to collect and share insights that drive the better understanding of the risk that we have in front of us and how we collectively move forward. So if you wrap all those three things together, I hope you understand more why we think we have a unique opportunity in front of us. It can build on the momentum that we have now, maybe the first time, I would argue, a good understanding of the value of GIS to move forward, and how we actually take our conversations beyond just COVID-19 into truly understanding and building preparedness and resilience around the idea of all hazards. And so we're going to share with you three things today. We're going to start with the state of Indiana. Marianne's going to show us a great example of statewide mitigation plan that's been updated. That's going to tie all this together right off the bat. Then we're going to transition and take a look at some of the new capabilities and tools within ArcGIS as an example that people can start to use to understand and truly drive into different hazard analysis. So Shelby will take us through that. And finally, we'll end with a bit of Q&A just to take the conversation forward from there. So with that, I'm going to stop and I'll transition over to Marianne, and we'll get started with the first step and take a look at what Indiana's done. Some great work at hand. So Marianne, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. And so I started working at the Polis Center about exactly 2 years ago. And within a month of starting there, I started working on the update of the Indiana Multi-Hazard Mitigation Plan. And it was a great introduction for me, getting to meet so many people within the state who were involved with this and creating all those connections, because those connections became such an important part of the development of this plan and of mitigation in general. So we started working on the plan in October 2018, and we wrapped it up in April 2019. And that's a pretty short turnaround because we had quite a bit of work to do. One of the things that we wanted to really improve over previous plans was the analysis of flooding hazards. And in the past, we had used the centroid of a parcel, for example, to determine that property's risk of flooding. And what we wanted to do this time around was use the actual building locations if there was a structure on that parcel, so that we could have some more accurate results from our analysis. So we couldn't have done this, before I go too far into the story, we really could not have done this without the help from a lot of people. And here's a few logos from all the people who helped out. We worked, of course, very closely with the Indiana Department of Homeland Security. We worked also very closely with other state departments, Natural Resources, IDEM, and more. We are very active in the Indiana Silver Jackets. And if you're not familiar with Silver Jackets, I hope most of you are, but if you're not, take a minute to look at what they do. And Indiana, we meet on a monthly basis. Actually, we have our meeting on Thursday, and we have people from across the board joining those meetings every month. We have federal government, we've got FEMA, we've got USGS, we've got the Corps of Engineers, we've got state government, and we have academics and some private sector attending as well. So it's a great way for us to talk about hazards coming up and how we can go and do what we can and do our part to mitigate those hazards. So leveraging the Silver Jackets was a big component of working on the update of this plan, because we didn't have all the answers. I certainly didn't, and we needed the help from everybody within the states to be able to update the plan and make it appropriate for the state. So overall, we had over 60 people who supported us in the writing of this plan. They either met with us to provide us with some data, some information, provided names of people to talk to, or they even wrote some sections of the plan or reviewed or provided us with just information that we could use. One of the things that when we were looking at what we were going to do for this plan, we really decided to focus on climate change. And that had not been talked about very much in the previous plan 5 years ago. But we decided it was time to include that, and so we did. And the timing was really great, because right about the same time, there was the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessments that came out, and that was an effort by Purdue University, and they looked at various items on how climate change will be affecting the state of Indiana, looking at agriculture, tourism, energy, and so forth. So this was a really great resource for us to be able to summarize what the changes are for Indiana, the good and the bad. And also looking at, what can we do to mitigate some of the bad changes that climate change brings to us. So two of the biggest changes that impact us in the state, the biggest one is flooding. Indiana's always had flooding, but what we're seeing is an increase in precipitation. And what we're mainly seeing is in winter and spring, we're seeing higher amounts of precipitation, and sometimes big rain events are getting more common. But then in the summer, the temperatures are getting warmer and we're getting a little bit less rain. So we're kind of looking at a cycle of flooding in the spring and then maybe droughts in the summer. So how does that impact us as a state? How does it impact our economy? There are two things that Indiana does really well, and that's grow corn and soybeans. I've learned to recognize both of those pretty quickly since I've moved here. And climate change does have an impact on that. And the other impact that climate change has on Indiana is what seems to be a possible increase in tornadoes within the state. And I'll talk about that a little bit later and show a map, but there's some preliminary evidence that shows that Tornado Alley may be moving east a little bit. And so Indiana may see more severe weather and especially tornadoes. Before I go too far into the story, I just kind of wanted to give a quick overview on the technologies that we used for this project. I mentioned the analysis of flooding on properties in the state and what the financial impact would be of you know, a 100-year flood or 500-year flood. To do that, we used ArcGIS Pro for a lot of that analysis, along with some SQL Server, model builder, data interoperability extension, and quite a bit of custom coding as well. So that was actually quite fun. All the maps that we did for the plan were created in Pro, but a lot of the analysis using Hazus was created in ArcMap because Hazus is not yet supported in ArcGIS Pro. But overall, we really stuck with the Esri software suite, and that worked quite well for us. So why, this is a story map. And if you look at the plan itself, once it's done, it is about 300 pages, and nobody's going to read it page to page, except maybe for Steve Green, who's on the phone right now, I believe, who reviewed our plan. But you know, it's long, it's detailed, it has just a lot of information. And we wanted to be able to provide kind of a more interesting, more interactive, dynamic summary of the plan. And we decided to do that by creating the StoryMap, which is just a one-page website. And you can scroll through and you have some interactive maps that you can play with. You can have images, you can have videos, and it doesn't require any programming to do. So actually we had one of our GIS analysts who does not know any programming put together the vast majority of the story map. And it's really easy to maintain, easy to update and create. And I think it gives a really nice experience to the end user as well to kind of explore the information behind this. When we started working on this, you know, we did decide to focus on climate change in the state. And we wanted to mainly focus on how can we show, you know, we know we're going to have some changes and some changes in the weather, and they're going to impact us. But what can we do about it? Just because it's going to happen doesn't mean we have to sit back and relax and just, you know, this is going to happen and there's nothing we can do. So we really wanted to focus on what are those mitigation items that we can do as residents, as Hoosiers, to try to minimize the impact of climate change. So we started out by summarizing some of the information from the climate change assessment report that Purdue University put together. And we showed some of the warming trends for the state of Indiana. What's nice here is you can have an interactive map, so you can click on a county and get some information. This shows the, you know, medium emissions forecast and high emissions forecast in terms of temperature. And it also allows you to kind of have, you know, you can zoom in, you can zoom out, but you can also have kind of a story and some pages to your map along with some text. So we wanted to include that in here and provide this information for the users to better understand where they live, what the potential impact of climate change would be, and in this case, the increase in temperatures. I mentioned earlier, we're seeing increases in precipitation, and we wanted to show how that differs in the northern, central, and southern portions of the state in terms of, you know, how much more rain are we likely to see from March to May, for example, in here. I mentioned an increase in storms and tornadoes, and this is one of the documents that we based that statement on, and it kind of shows the frequency of tornadoes, and they're obviously a big thing here in Indiana that can happen. And something that there are things that we can do. We can't stop the tornadoes, but there are things we can do to prevent property damage and prevent lives, and save lives. So we wanted to talk about that as well. Once we kind of gave the background on the main items of changes in the climate that we think may happen for the state, we started talking about flooding specifically. And we talked about specific flooding events in more recent memory that have impacted the state. I think it always resonates a little bit more if we can show a visual to people. A map is great, and I love maps, I'm a GIS geek, but a picture showing flooding is probably going to have a bit more of an impact to people. So we wanted to show what that looks like, and we also wanted to provide some information on the potential flooding risk for various counties in the state. And most of what we did was on a county basis. So we wanted to show, how many buildings do we estimate would be damaged if, for example, the entire county of Marion County was flooded at a 100-year flood. 10,400 buildings could be damaged, and that's about 3% of the buildings in the county. That's unlikely to happen, but we wanted to show, what are we looking at? What does this mean in practice? We also were able to provide some financial estimates of what the damage would be. We also wanted to link people to a website that's been put together by the Department of Natural Resources here in Indiana. And it provides information where you can click on your house, or you can view where the 100-year floods are near where you live. And they're actually working on updating this website right now. But we wanted to provide this information to the citizens. And I mentioned we wanted to talk about mitigation. So this is an area in Fort Wayne that used to be, this is a flood area, and it was kind of dilapidated, not very nice. And in just the past few years, they have changed this and turned this into a wonderful park that has been set up so that if it does flood, it's not going to have a lot of damage. So it's been built in such a way that it can be resistant to flood, but it can also provide a way, a place for the water to go and make the city more resilient to floods. Droughts is another item that can impact us, especially in the summer. And we wanted to provide a little bit of an animation of the the droughts of 2012 and how it impacted the state and then how it changed over time. We then also talked about, some of the mitigation practices that have been put into place and how the state is working towards that. Tornadoes are huge. And what I really liked about this is we were able to show historic tracks of tornadoes in the state from about the 1950s, 60s to about 2018, 2019 is what we're showing in here. And then you could click on an actual tornado track and get some information. But what I really liked about this is we were able to include video as well in the plan. And you may remember this was the Henryville tornado from a few years ago that touched a school and completely destroyed the gym. And I think that really will resonate with people when they see it. It's, if you just see a track on a map, okay, but if you see the destruction that it can cause, it'll kind of put you in a different mood and maybe more willing to do something about it. One of the things that's been really great as part of what I do is working with counties to get their mitigation plans up to date so that they can be eligible for pre-disaster mitigation funding. And one of the counties we worked with was Washington County, and they have been building safe rooms, and there was a news piece about some of the tornado shelters that they have built in the States, and so we've included that in here as well so people can better understand what those do. Another item of concern is vulnerable populations, and there are typically 5 that we look at. So English not being a citizen's primary language, or percentage of poverty, disability, age 65 and older, or without a high school diploma. A lot of the non-English primary language and no high school diploma counties in the state are due to Amish populations, and LaGrange County, for example, has quite a large Amish population, and so that's where a lot of this comes from. And so we've included maps as well to show people where those populations are across the state, because it does vary depending on the disability or whether they don't speak English or are in poverty. And those are people that are most at risk when there is a disaster. And then finally, we wanted to show where all of the counties within the state were in terms of their mitigation plans. And this was as of, I believe, December of 2018. And it showed, which counties had an up-to-date mitigation plan and which counties did not. Since then, this has mostly turned green. But that was the condition of our plans in Indiana by the end of the year. So we've actually been really happy with this. We've gotten a lot of good feedback, and we're hoping that the next time around, when it's time to update our plan, we can make more of it available in such a format so that people are more likely to then look at that and see what they can do. And hopefully we can include even more information and maybe break it down for specific populations, for example, farmers versus rural areas or urban areas, and what people can do to do their part in mitigating disasters. So thank you. Shelby, I think it's all you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. That was awesome and a great segue into what I'm going to be talking about. I've got a handful of slides here, and I'm assuming you can see my screen. After the slides, I have some demo to share. So I thought I would start at a very high level. Just making sure I've got everything set here. Okay, I thought I'd start at a very high level and talk about ArcGIS patterns. The patterns that you see on this slide have emerged as patterns of use, and they are really what bring, they really are the value that ArcGIS brings or provides, especially when they are combined together. The user community is using these capabilities to, as you see in the slide, manage, share, and apply geographic information, ultimately to meet their specific business needs and challenges. And as they relate to the mitigation planning process, I'm going to be highlighting a couple of these patterns. And Marianne has demonstrated them both to us already. So the first being mapping and visualization. Ryan talked about getting a better understanding of the data and the information. And it's really looking at data in the context of location, right? It's sort of the cornerstone foundational to GIS. And when we talk about data in this context, we're talking about hazards, existing conditions and the built environment, risk to hazards, mitigation strategies, and I will also show a new solution, ArcGIS Solution, that derives 3D visualization of floods as compared to the built environment. The second capability that I'm going to highlight is sharing and collaboration. So ArcGIS as a collaborative platform. Esri has developed tools not only to store, manage, and apply the geographic information, but also to share and collaborate around it. So with a web services-based architecture, we can really share information using web apps. We have access to app builders, dashboard tools, configurable app templates, and even a website builder that I will share called ArcGIS Hub. On this next slide, I have laid out sort of the planning process on the left, and then the associated and relevant requirements for a state and local hazard mitigation plan per the FEMA mitigation planning program on the right. So sort of starting at the top and moving down, right? The planning process is all about bringing the right people, the data, and the resources to the table. So think collaboration, right? Moving down to the risk assessment is about describing hazards and assessing risk and impacts to hazards, understanding vulnerabilities of people and property to hazards. So, think mapping and visualization and analysis too. And then finally, of course, to build the mitigation strategy and specify mitigation actions based on the results of that risk assessment. So like Marianne mentioned, an approved mitigation plan is a precondition for a local or state government to receive FEMA mitigation project grants. And these concepts also live with FEMA's Risk Map program and other mitigation planning programs and efforts out there. Wanted to make the group aware, if you weren't already, of ArcGIS Solutions. So these are solution templates designed to meet the specific need listed on the slide. The solution names are sort of around the outside of the emergency management phase diagram there. All these solutions are available at solutions.arcgis.com. And they are part of an ArcGIS subscription. So if you use ArcGIS in your organization, you will have access to these solutions. They are supported by Esri, so you can leverage your Esri account team or Esri tech support. Also nice to know that you're keeping up with the latest tech and capabilities across the platform. These are no-code solutions. They're configurable, so you basically plug your data into the solution and they are ready to go. So kind of moving from the bottom there, starting with preparedness, you know, we have tools for getting organized and educating the public about evacuation zones in preparation for a storm, you know, up to response during an event. You know, it's all about being dynamic and providing real-time data to the people that need it, including operational briefs. You know, running effective recoveries and communications with the public. And then around down to mitigation, of course. Couple of those are ArcGIS Pro projects designed to help you aggregate and organize data. The flood impact analysis tool is what I will be demonstrating in just a minute. One more slide just to kind of loop back on the collaborative theme here. So, you know, organizations are increasingly collaborating, especially now with the unique circumstances that we're in, right? You know, and referring to constituent engagement includes sharing of information across departments within an organization or with other stakeholders, partner agencies, or the public. ArcGIS Online is the SaaS platform, software as a service, that enables the modern sharing capabilities and also includes the templates for web apps, maps, reports, sites. Many of those tools and app templates are part of your ArcGIS subscription. And then ArcGIS Hub is a website builder. So Hub supports open data, collaboration, and two-way sharing with the public and with external parties. And then Survey 123 is a form-based data collection tool. And if you look down at the bottom left of the slide, you can see that surveys, as well as all the content that I've mentioned so far, is shared in this kind of common sharing model so that you can keep the content private till you're ready to share it. And then you can share it out with a specific group of people. That can be a mix of internal and external users. You can share it with your ArcGIS Online organization, or you can open it up to the public. So with that, I'm going to switch over to a handful of tools and examples in demonstration, and hopefully you can pick up some new ideas. Okay, so move these controls out of the way. The first thing I'm showing here is an ArcGIS Pro project. I have ArcGIS Pro in dark theme, so you'll see that it's dark around the ribbon and the panes here on the side. First thing I'd like to point out is the flood impact analysis solution is effectively several task groups that lead you through these repeatable tasks that we can see on the right-hand side. And tasks are new at Pro. They didn't exist in ArcMap, and they help sort of guide you through, like I said, that repeatable workflow. What we're looking at here is the city of Boulder with their 100-year flood depth grid shown in the map. And the requirements of the flood impact analysis solution, which is this Pro project. The actual solution has you download the Pro project. It requires that you bring depth rasters and an elevation surface, like a DTM, for example. And then these tasks are a series of Python scripts that walk you through preparing those rasters and that elevation surface, and then doing the flood impact. So what you're doing is basically looking at the assets of interest. That might be roads, that might be buildings, critical infrastructure, bridges, etc. And assigning the depth associated with that flood event to each asset. Okay, and we're interested in understanding depths to know the severity of the impact of the event, and that might be to structure and contents, damage, to the actual response that's needed in the event of, in this case, a 100-year flood event, and then of course life safety risk. After you do those impact analyses, then this solution walks you through actually sharing that data out in 3D, and I will show you that in just a minute. You can also publish that data up to a web scene in ArcGIS Online, again, enabling you to share, to sort of cast a wider net with the results of that analysis. A couple other things I want to point out while I'm in Pro. One is under the Share tab of my Pro project, you'll notice I have this ArcGIS Solutions button. And this is another task group, actually, that helps you deploy those solutions that we saw at solutions.arcgis.com. That is an add-in to ArcGIS Pro, so I just wanted to make you aware that that's there. Another cool thing to point out in Pro, I'm logged into my ArcGIS Online org right now, and I have direct access to the content in that portal. So ArcGIS Pro supports the WebGIS pattern and was really built to do that. So we're now looking at all the content I currently have in that ArcGIS Online org, which is pretty cool. ArcGIS Pro is a client to web services. I can actually interact with the web services right here in Pro. I wanted to point out too that I can access the living atlas of the world right here from ArcGIS Pro. And the Living Atlas is an amazing resource. It's a wealth of data sets that Esri curates from, I believe, thousands of organizations. I can drill into these different categories, including imagery, base maps. I encourage you guys to check it out. And I'm going to drill into the people at risk. Okay. There's that CDC Social Vulnerability Index. I've already added it to my map. So here in my contents on the left, I can click that on and get a sense of, who are the vulnerable population in relation to that hazard. Okay, next place I'm going to go are the results of that impact analysis for the city of Boulder. So this is obviously a 3D scene of, this is Boulder Creek coming into Boulder. And I know the folks from the Natural Hazard Center at CU Boulder will be interested to see, their campus in relation to that 3D flooding. The buildings that are colored in this scene are colored based on the depth of flooding. So the darker the red, the deeper the flood at that particular place. And you can just see how impactful it is to see the data in 3D. There's also a new solution called the 3D base map solution, another ArcGIS solution that was very effective in helping us build out this 3D base map. Okay, City of Boulder updated their hazard mitigation plan in 2018. And we just saw that they have a lot of potential for impact to structures based on that 100-year event. And they've done a very nice job outlining the mitigation actions that they plan to put in place to mitigate that risk. So we can see, you know, they're hoping to relocate one of their critical infrastructure. They're going to keep up to date with their planning. They have an acquisition program for their high hazard, what they call their high hazard zone, and other creative solutions to mitigating that hazard. The next example I'm showing here from that same flood impact analysis solution is looking at the city of Austin post Hurricane Harvey. And what I want to point out on this one is, like I mentioned, the impact to assets. That solution also looks at the height of bridges above the water surface elevation. So in the case of this bridge, sort of mid-screen, we can see that that bridge, I believe this is in feet, is 6 feet above that water surface elevation for this flood event. In the case of this closer bridge, the number is negative, so we can see that that bridge is actually underwater per this analysis during this event. And so, you know, watch that bridge when it floods in Austin. The next example I have is from Wellington, New Zealand, and this is looking at sea level rise. So with that flood impact analysis solution, you can look at riverine flooding, storm surge flooding, or sea level rise. Right now we're looking at Wellington with sea level rise of 1 meter, and we can see that in this dashboard, you know, what they've done here is they've pulled that web scene right into a web app, an ArcGIS dashboard. And so I'm able to dynamically see how many buildings are affected and some other statistics around impacts to roads. I can switch to a 2 meter flood and start to see, I'm sorry, not flood, sea level rise, and start to see how those impacts will change as well. So everything I just showed, for the most part, is part of this flood impact analysis solution. Each solution has a page like this that describes sort of its intent and, you know, what you need in terms of software, and a lot of great documentation around walking through the actual tool and how to derive those flood impacts and that 3D visualization. Also want to point out at solutions.arcgis, you know, this section for emergency management, which aligns with that slide I just showed a few minutes ago. I'm not going to click into these, but they're kind of separated into buckets. Each one has the documentation similar to what we saw with the flood impact analysis. Okay, so keeping on the mapping and visualization theme, I wanted to share this app. I really like this app. This is State of South Dakota. They do a really nice job with their mitigation planning. And these are the mitigation projects across the state that they've implemented over time. And I'll point out a couple of them. This first one is a safe room for tornado and severe winter shelter. Or severe wind rather. And they make available, you know, what disaster this was associated with, what funding stream did it come through, you know, even some photos to show, you know, how the project is going. And then, you know, along a linear feature like this, I'm sure you guys have guesses of what these are. These are mitigation around burying electrical lines, which is very common mitigation practice in South Dakota. Also wanted to share the Seattle Hazard Explorer, another way to visualize data. And they've used a StoryMap here, and I like how they've organized hazards across the top tabs of the StoryMap. Okay, I'm now going to pivot to ArcGIS as a collaborative platform, and I've got another few examples to show here. Marianne described the Indiana Silver Jackets and how proactive they are in the mitigation planning community in that state. And I worked with Marianne and Jim Sparks at the Polis Center to pull together this prototype of using ArcGIS Hub as a collaborative platform for the various members of the Silver Jackets to meet their end goal, which is to reduce flood risk and to support solutions, mitigation planning solutions. As I scroll down, I can see, we've got a statewide current conditions. This is all data coming in from the Living Atlas. I've got a social media feed, some data-driven statistics coming from underlying data sets, shared data. I can click into hazard data, and this might be a resource, or not might, this is intended to be a resource for planners across the state. So maybe I'm from a local government and I'm updating my plan, and I want to find the authoritative data set of historic tornado tracks. Well, Indiana Silver Jackets can use ArcGIS Hub to share that information out. I can actually visualize the tornadoes. I can look at the table of attributes. I can filter the data and then download it in these various formats, or grab the REST endpoint, the web service endpoint, to bring into my own WebGIS. A couple more things I want to point out about this site is I can track on events that are happening across the state. I can keep a calendar and even track who is attending those events through ArcGIS Hub. I have links off to previous meeting minutes, and those are just stored as PDFs right in ArcGIS Online. I also have an app here that's describing the membership of Silver Jackets, and this is dummy data for the most part, although Kevin, Mickey, and Marianne both made the list. This is an interactive app showing the locations of where the various members live with some filters along the top. The last thing I want to point out about this Hub site is I have a page here called Internal, and you can see that I'm actually logged into the Hub site. I have a survey here on top. Well, what I was going to say about the internal page is I only can see this page, and I only have access to the content of this page because I'm logged in, because this page was shared with a group that I'm a member of. And so that I can get at private content sharing with ArcGIS Hub, which is very powerful. So that if I'm supporting the statewide shelters initiative, I can come into a particular shelter and maybe change its status and be able to do that through this platform in this private space. When I log out of this site, you see that page disappeared from the site. The next one I have is also a prototype of an ArcGIS Hub site. This is one I built called City of Ski Town. And just to show what a nice platform it would be to support your mitigation planning process. You can get feedback from stakeholder groups or from the public through interactive apps. I can also include my plan document right there on the site for review. The next example I have is kind of stepping out of mitigation planning into emergency response. This is a template. This is a Hub template, and is a new way to really communicate with the public about any type of emergency. You'll recognize some of these aspects from the last examples. This would be a shelter locator app. There's a volunteer survey for if folks want to get involved, social media, etc. Also, sort of citizen reporting on damage and debris. Speaking of Survey 123, I just wanted to show you an example of a Survey 123 form. In this case, it's collecting information about specific assets in the community. You notice these are smart forms, so based on the answer to a question, the subsequent question can adjust. And this could be something that as a member of the planning team I fill out, or maybe I send to business owners or to other groups to collect. And then the final piece I have is still on the collaboration theme. is a story map. The state of Ohio does a really nice job sort of showcasing and highlighting the mitigation success that they have across their state. And this is a story map where they're describing their safe room program and the grant funding that came through to make this success. So guys, that was a lot of ideas for modernizing and taking a proactive approach to mitigation planning. I am always excited to talk about this topic. Please keep in touch if you do too. And I want to thank Lori and the Natural Hazard Center for this opportunity and for supporting this community. With that, Ryan, I think I'm handing it back to you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Shelby. So just as a bit of closing and then back to Lori just for some Q&A is, we hope we've given you a bit of ideas of, number one, how a great project at a state level, bringing all the resources together across the community around mitigation planning and communication has come together with Indiana. Just kudos to Marianne and the team there. Collectively, they've done an outstanding job. Then hopefully with Shelby's side, you've got a bit more of ideas of some of these ready to use templates and tools that can help you both analyze and make those data-driven decisions we talked about, but also then how do you bring people together around the idea of truly effective mitigation and awareness that's needed at the community level to drive action. And then ultimately getting back on the outside, which is just how do we communicate across the board with all of our constituents, all of our players, and truly making the difference that we need. So I would just say the opportunity at hand, right, just to come back to that for a minute, is if you're a GIS professional on the line today and you're listening, right, there's a new opportunity at the door, which is that people now understand probably more than ever the value of data and the idea of decision making driven by apps and the like because of COVID-19. Take that opportunity to go knock on the door, have a cup of coffee, have that conversation about how you can apply these tools to broader mitigation strategies for all hazards response. So with that, Lori, thank you for having us, and we'll do Q&A and turn it back to you.
Very nice. Ryan and Shelby and Marianne, thank you so much for those presentations. And we're just reminded at the Natural Hazard Center that we're very fortunate to be located close to Esri's offices. And we really wanted to thank Jeff Barani and Shelby Hines for their partnership with the center and for bringing this knowledge and expertise to our audience today. So thank you. That was an amazing set of presentations. And so we have a few minutes remaining for some questions. And so to everybody out there in the audience, if you have questions, know that if we run out of time today, which we very well may, we'll put written responses up on our website. But to use the time we have remaining, I'm just going to start with a couple of questions that have come in. So one of the questions that Sean asked was, he said, you mentioned that these solutions are available through the ArcGIS Solutions in our ArcGIS Pro software. So is that right, Shelby or Ryan? Is that where those solutions are at?
Go ahead, Shelby. Yeah.
Yep, you bet. That's exactly right. Yep, you can find them all at solutions.arcgis.com. And what I showed was the solution deployment tool that is an add-in to ArcGIS Pro that enables you to deploy and then configure the solutions from Pro, most often in ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise.
And then, thank you. And then another attendee wanted to know, can the ARC solutions be used in conjunction with the National Weather Service flood stage warning data?
Good question. Probably yes. We'll have to take a look and dive in. Like I had mentioned, the requirements for that tool are the depth grid and the elevation surface. So if you can derive, the depth grid from that data, then for sure. So we'll need to take a closer look.
And then I'll do one more question before we're out of time. This is from Chad. He wanted to know, can you pull in the HEC RAS 2D time sequence flows to the 3D scene to show not only location and depth, but also the flow path?
So that wouldn't actually be part of the solution and the output of the solution, but you could certainly tack on to that analysis, after the fact, or combine them together to make a more comprehensive analysis.
Thank you. And then one more just came in from Nancy, so we'll do this one. Are there solutions for earthquake-related hazards such as ground failures as well?
That's a great question. Ryan, did you have a comment?
No, I would just say, yeah, not to the level that what Shelby showed for the flood analysis component of that. So that's one we've kind of deep dived one specific natural hazard. We've gone into that conversation. So there are quite a bit of other solutions around that disaster cycle that Shelby alluded to that we think are useful in that context. So real-time feeds and the like. So it's probably worth a follow-up, more than we could talk to in the next minute or so. But yeah, Nancy, if you'd like to reach out, we'll connect through Lori and we'll follow up on that conversation from there.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
And several people were writing in throughout, both to the panelists and so forth, just saying how inspired they were to see a state level hazard mitigation plan in a StoryMap format. So thank you for that. Thank you again, Shelby and Ryan and Esri, for your partnership. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, just to close us out, everyone. I'm so sorry we're at time, but just want to again thank our 3 panelists and also thank all of the participants for attending today. Again, if you are interested in earning one emergency management training certificate through IAEM, please do visit the Hazard Center webpage at hazards.colorado.edu and click on the training tab for more information. And then next up, everybody, next month, we're going to be taking stock of the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, 20 years of promise, pitfalls, and progress with the DMA 2K. It's also National Community Planning Month, so we're going to be hearing from a panel of planning experts. We hope you will save the date of Tuesday, October 13th, 2020 from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. And until then, we hope that you will all please stay safe, take care, and keep doing the extraordinary work that you are doing to reduce hazards risk in our nation and beyond. And finally, again, thank you to Ryan, Shelby, and Mary Ann. Have a great day, everyone, and please take care of yourself and others. Bye.